All right, hi everyone. My name is Tran, and I'm currently a PhD student in American Studies and Ethnicity at USC. And so my presentation today for this conference is entitled Survival on the Food Web, Asian America and the Creation of Food Networks in Times of Crisis. And before I get started, I just want to preface by saying that although my discussion in this presentation regards the Asian American community at large, it is not a monolithic group. This is because the experiences of different minorities and ethnicities within the Asian American umbrella are incredibly diverse. And I cannot simply subsume everyone under the same category because that would be to make the mistake that many racist Americans have done to Asian immigrants and citizens over the course of US history, and particularly in recent times, by viewing all Asian bodies as identical and without complexities. So for this particular presentation, I will draw upon media representations to argue that digital images can engender both racial distaste for Asian food vis-a-vis the virus, and also desirable taste for cultural cuisine through group Facebook posts. And through the lens of representational taste and distaste, I will analyze how Asian American online groups push back against the racist depictions of their bodies in the news by using language and digital images that center community support and solidarity. So when the latest variant of SARS made its first appearance in global news in late 2019, public fears arose in tandem with viral videos of Chinese people consuming bats and other wild animals. And following the controversial release of a video which depicted a Chinese influencer drinking bat soup, a lot of wild speculations on social media regarding the origin of what many then called the Wuhan virus, to accusations of unclean, unusual, and non-normative Chinese eating habits. And after that, articles by news sources like The Guardian, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal bolstered some of these presumptions by invoking images of China's wild animal trade and unsanitary wet markets, which showed thousands of dead bamboo rats, crocodiles, and bats, which were compiled on trays for purchase by local passerbys looking for groceries. And while at the time the scientific origins of the virus were not yet clear, these news reports cited the unkempt and crowded environments of the wholesale markets as sites of epidemiological risk and also potential infection because of the human and wildlife convergence. So this proximity between wildlife and humanity clashed with Western perceptions of their inherent separation, which engendered racial distaste for Chinese people and their food, for the exoticness and also the unsanitary, image of these food cultures, the two becoming kind of inextricable from each other in many Americans' eyes. So this was exacerbated by Donald Trump's christening of the disease as Kung Flu and the China virus, which increased public anxieties about COVID-19, as well as revived racist stereotypes and attitudes about Chinese food and racial difference. So these intensified public fears of viral contagion transpiring via Chinese foodways resulted in severe customer reductions at restaurants across America's Chinatowns and Asian American communities, which forced hundreds of restaurants to close because of a lack of funds and the economic recession. And in addition to that, in several of these cases, a lot of Asian-owned restaurants were also discriminately targeted and vandalized with racist graffiti and smashed windows, as you can see in some of these headlines. A lot of these negative depictions of Chinese people as viruses and kind of by association, other Asian bodies as sites of contagion by government officials and news media led to a dramatic increase in anti-Asian hate crimes in the past year. And I thought I just had to mention this in light of recent events that have been happening as well. According to a recent statistical report conducted by Stop AAPI Hate, nearly 3,800 hate incidents have occurred to Asian Americans, most of whom are women, between March of 2020 and February of 2021. And roughly 503 incidents occurred in 2021 alone, which included the violent beatings of the elderly this past January, and also the horrific shooting of 6 Asian women in Atlanta, Georgia. these numbers don't even account for the number of attacks that were not reported to police by many older senior citizens who lack community resources or sufficient English language skills. Furthermore, many of these episodes were also accompanied by references to the COVID-19 virus, with perpetrators accusing their victims with phrases like, "You are the virus, you are the reason we have coronavirus, go back to China," or "You're the one who brought the virus here." And in one particular incident in Seattle this past March, one man assaulted a couple walking in Chinatown and told them Asians need to be put in their place. So by characterizing the coronavirus as transmissible via racial difference, many of these incidents expose the ongoing societal interpretations of Asians as undesirable figures whose very bodies act as carriers for disease, viral transmission, and potential death. And scholar Priscilla Wald has argued that, quote, "The carrier is the archetypical stranger, both embodying the danger of microbial invasion and transforming it into the possibility for rejuvenation and growth," end quote. The persistent racism against America's Chinatowns is also not a new phenomenon. As scholar Nyan Shah's book, Contagious Divides, Epidemics and Race in San Francisco's Chinatown, for example, has revealed that during the 19th century, what was regarded as deviant Chinese practices of sanitation and cleanliness led to heightened police surveillance, quarantining of different individuals, and also public scrutiny of Chinese communities, which in Western eyes fell out of proper social conduct. But my question is, what is it about Asian food that makes transmissible the racism that has been routinely conferred upon bodies? And what is the shutting down of numerous Chinese and other Asian restaurants due to COVID-19 discrimination convey about our society's understandings of the alien, the exotic, and the oriental? And to expound on this concept, I want to revisit Stuart Hall's seminal lecture on representation and the media, in which he argues that representation is the manipulation of meanings by those in power to confer stereotypes and one preferred meaning upon certain marginalized populations. And this produces biased depictions and visual images of groups that are consumed by the general public and taken to be reality. As such, the distasteful media images that we saw in the beginning slides are of seemingly disorganized, unsanitary, potentially dangerous, infectious Chinese wet markets. These images demonstrate how negative representations can affect public perceptions, especially in the Western world, of Asian food. And this deters people from eating in or even visiting Chinatown for fear of contagion. So when the nationwide shelter in place was put into effect in April of 2020, many Asian restaurants felt the severe impact of both the economic downfall and also increasing racial discrimination. And a large majority of these small business owners, who are typically older parents and grandparents or first-generation immigrants, did not have operating knowledge of social media to help them survive in this time. And community building in the aftermath of these incidents have been especially crucial to help these restaurants and businesses continue and for these food cultures to be protected. So alongside the creation of Facebook groups, which I will discuss in a couple of slides, I also wanted to mention that social media hashtags, such as like hashtag dine with them, hashtag I will eat with you, and hashtag support Chinatown, have encouraged customers to come back to Asian restaurants to dine, and also to stand in support of those who were affected by racist violence and discrimination. Excuse me. Additionally, positive Yelp reviews that have poured in from customers who purchase delivery or takeout from various Asian-owned businesses have also aided the continuing survival of many depopulated restaurants. For this presentation specifically, I'm choosing to highlight the community building efforts of two Facebook groups that I myself have participated in and benefited from because of my recent relocation from Dallas to Los Angeles this past December for grad school. And in response to the shuttering of numerous Asian-owned eateries and mom-and-pop shops in local cities, groups like SGV, which stands for San Gabriel Valley Eats, and Asian Grub and DFW have dramatically increased the delivery and takeout orders at local restaurants by promoting the sales favorite plates and also unique cultural specialties through their members' Facebook posts. And both SGV and DFW are home to hundreds of thousands of Asian Americans and also hundreds of ethnic restaurants, which were heavily hit by the pandemic. As one admin of Asian Grub has observed, following the news of many of these restaurant closures, she wrote, quote, "The community immediately banded together to provide real-time information on how each business was operating, enabling a lot of them to keep afloat. Many shops that were closed slowly began to open back up as word of our group spread and confidence in reopening increased," end quote. And as at the time of this presentation, both groups have way more than 35K members. And as you can see in some of their messages that were displayed on their About page, they were inspired to create these groups because of the suffering of these Asian-owned restaurants in the pandemic. So unlike the consumer-based advocacy work of Yelp reviews and social media hashtags that I mentioned in the last slide, these two Facebook groups developed new forms of agency for restaurant owners and their relatives who created profiles to self-promote. The Facebook platform became an avenue for younger Asian Americans to also advocate for their family members who are working in the restaurant industry, or for struggling business owners to publicize their own food and menus, and for other just regular activists and local food enthusiasts like me to support those restaurants that are struggling in the local community. So as for the theme of this conference, I want to stress some of the effective strategies that Facebook groups like SGV, Eats, and Asian Grub have employed to kind of bolster community activism and dismantle racist discrimination. In the past year, these online groups have collectively worked to counter the unfavorable public images of Asian food by concentrating on aspects of familial intimacy, cultural memory, and inter-ethnic solidarity in their posts. And for instance, to demonstrate familial intimacies and emotions through food images, posters will recount childhood experiences with the food they ate, write in support of their family members working in the restaurant industry, and use endearing terms like grandma and grandpa to refer to older restaurant owners who need help. And cultural memory has also been another important avenue for advocacy, because many of these Facebook posts will either historicize the origins of different culinary plates and traditions across Asia, to connect the rich histories of the food to modern day cuisine, or they will tell migration stories from various immigrant and refugee groups who have brought like these different spices and foods to North America. And some will even explain the local history of favorite restaurants, which have existed for decades, but are unfortunately threatened by closure. And finally, a lot of interethnic solidarity is a common theme in these Facebook posts, because members will post selfies of themselves, often masked with their food or just with the food itself, along with pictures of the owners to put faces to the names of the restaurants. And others who are curious about exploring different food cultures will put questions into the group, asking for recommendations on what is their favorite dish and what restaurants to find them at. And lastly, a lot of the posts elaborate on the taste of the food, talk about its deliciousness, and also the likelihood of the poster returning for more. And the images of food that accompany these messages, as I will show in the next few slides, kind of act as anti-representation, the anti-representation of the news media's negative depictions of Asian markets, because they picture tasty rather than dirty and contagious Asian food. So I don't want to go into too much detail here for the sake of time, but I just want us to look at these pictures and also the messages that Facebook members have posted alongside the pictures they portrayed, to kind of see the community building and support that these images confer. So as in the first one, we see both the pictures of the restaurant, the food, and also a message that asks for support. In the second one, similarly, you have a picture of the owner. And also in the third one, mentioning that the place was a childhood favorite. Same for Asian Grubhub and DFW. These restaurants, they mentioned that the restaurant is either closing or threatened by discrimination and a lot of violence. And then they will attempt to use language that is conveying the deliciousness of the food in order to help bring people back to these restaurants. So in contrast to the media's negative depiction of Asian food, which they say derived from unclean and dangerous origins, the reviews and images that are posted in these groups offer a different representation, as I've mentioned. And because the majority of the group members who post are of Asian descent themselves, which is evidenced in kind of the common ethnic surnames in the Asian diaspora, the messages they write frequently incorporate mentions of kinship, family histories, and shared traumas from past racial discrimination. So I just want to briefly mention this as well. A lot of these Facebook groups have also given back to their community in various ways, as this timeline created by the creators of SGB Eats demonstrates. Online community activism also took physical form at different events in which members of the group held fundraisers or donated to local hospitals and also partnered with local food and beverage businesses to help bring in more profit. So in summary, if we consider the ongoing violence against Asian bodies in the United States, Asian American Facebook groups have pretty much demonstrated that one of the most effective strategies to counter racism can take the form of building networks of sociality, familial intimacy, and familiarity around desirable food and cuisine, which kind of rejects the notion of contagion as racial difference, as I've noted, and emphasizes racial harmony and cross-cultural solidarity through shared food networks and taste. Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited to join you all for the conference.